Welcome back to another chat straight from the horse's mouth. Today we'll be looking at a few of my favorite concepts for creating unique and interesting characters, with or without the tropes that often drive the D&D classes. Without further ado, here we go! First up, what makes a character unique and interesting? Is it their background? Their motivation? Dead parents in a cool bat costume? Actually, it's none of these, but bats are pretty cool. Uniqueness and intrigue can be hard to identify and hard to quantify, because on one hand, a character that feels completely mundane on paper can end up being a fantastic one, and another that should be amazing can fall flat on their face in practice. So I'm going to take a look at a few of my own favorite D&D characters and try to abstract why I enjoy playing them so much. First up, we have Hatrasoth, a silver dragon pretending to be a human, hiding among them as an ancient white dragon hunts her. She's a grave cleric of Bahamut, keeping careful watch over the balance between life and death, but mostly she's just a scared young dragon who has been isolated for years. She's very trope-heavy, leaning into the loner stereotype, dead parents and everything. So what makes her so unique? Well, perspective. Hatrasoth is very old by human standards, but very young by draconic ones, giving her some extremely interesting perspective on events. She's simultaneously the most experienced party member, but also very immature in many ways, which drives her behavior to be somewhat enigmatic. She's really bad at being a person, unable to be a dragon for fear that her hunter will find her, and kind of stuck in this identity crisis despite her strong moral compass and convictions. Her turmoil is internal, which leads me to my next point. Room to grow. Her particular campaign starts at level 9, which means I had room to get a little bit creative with her creation. A dragon probably wouldn't work well for a lower level campaign, but that's up to each individual DM. My point here is that while she has a backstory, it leaves her a ton of room to grow. She's emotionally stunted due to her solitary lifestyle and paranoia, and she's scared of everyone around her and even scared of herself for the attention that her true form could bring her. This keeps me from breaking every single encounter by throwing a dragon in it, which would be fun but would get really old very quickly. In-game, this gives Hattie a ton of room to evolve. She can mature, she can learn to accept her own identity, and maybe even someday she can come out to those around her without fear of their negative reactions. Her story is a relatable one, even if it's very abstracted. Well, so far we have perspective and room to grow for a basis for character creation, but let's take a look at another favorite of mine before we come up with a more complete list. Chamomile Wildlight. He's a Harengon rogue swashbuckler. Someone once told me that they didn't think it was possible to play a swashbuckler that wasn't a charismatic pirate. I counter that with Old Chamomile, or Bonkers as he prefers to be called. He's a fast-talking bunny boy who uses his speed and agility to make up for his quite diminutive stature. Have you ever tried to stab a rabbit that could stab back? Well, I hope not, but I can imagine it would be quite a challenge. Bonkers is a caffeine-gulping, gray morality, adrenaline-hunting storyteller, chasing a lifetime worth of epic stories and adventures. He's not necessarily in it for the glory or for the fortune, but the fame that is absolutely his addiction. Well, that and coffee, I suppose. The classic rogue is a brooding, stealthy, black-cloaked figure who is barely a ghost if you try to find them. Bonkers is an outgoing TikToker who can talk his way in and out of trouble, but also knows when to cut and run with his incredible sense for danger. This brings up the subversion of tropes. I took a classic style and turned it inside out. I took a brooding edgelord class and turned him into an e-boy with an addiction to fantasy monster. Please sponsor me. And Fortnite dances, probably. Now, I tell you these stories because I genuinely love these characters, but also because they are made after years of experience and my own fair share of shallow and simplistic characters. This all ties together into a handful of guidelines to help you create a fantastic character for D&D or any other role-playing game or even story, really. 1. Give them a personality. D&D is skewed towards combat by design, for sure, but don't forget that a lot of the game takes place outside of combat. It's all about telling a story, and while epic fights make for great stories, so does that one time you snuck into a fancy party and released a dozen chickens, so you could see who had alectorophobia. Create your character with the awareness that they are a unique individual, living in a fantastical world, and have had vast and mundane experiences that shaped them into a relatively normal person. Which brings up my next point. Number 2, give them unique individual goals. Adventuring is a dangerous business, and most people would probably much rather live a comfortable life selling general goods, farming, or weaving cloth. If your character is an adventurer, look at why they are an adventurer instead of anything else. Chamomile craves the fame and the adrenaline. Hattie was forced into it by a mixture of circumstance and a nudge from Bahamut. Maybe yours needs the money to open a business that they've always dreamed about, or just really likes hitting things with a big hammer. Whatever the reason, it should be understandable justification for a hard life of danger and travel versus the comfort and stability of a traditional profession. But don't forget to give them number 3, room to grow. Most adventures start at level 1 or close to it. While this may sound like a bummer, remember that most common folks in D&D would be considered essentially level 0. So even a level 1 character is someone who has a degree of experience and skill. That said, there's still 19 more levels to go, so remember that your level 1 character probably isn't going to be a king with 50 years of leadership, or an elite assassin sent from the heavens. Don't forget that they'll need to develop over time into a stronger character, both from a gameplay perspective and from a narrative one. Leave them room to progress and grow as the story you weave affects their goals, desires, and personalities. Speaking of personalities, this brings up number 4. Give them a reason to be with the party. This is a simple but extremely important one. D&D is a collaborative storytelling game, and to do that, you need to collaborate. Your character needs a reason for sticking with their current party. Strength in numbers is a good one, common goals or interests is another. The specifics don't really matter as long as you can justify them working with the group as a whole. Characters who don't fit well with the group, or who won't at least share some common interest, tend to create tension within the game and greatly reduce the amount of fun that's had by everyone, including the person playing that character. And finally, we reach number 5. Mindfulness of existing tropes. You all meet in a tavern. That's a classic D&D beginning for a reason. It's still a pretty good one. It's a little bit cheesy and overdone, but it's fun, it's casual, and generally fairly low stakes. Similarly, so are classic characters. The rogue with sticky fingers and dead parents. The snobby cleric. The fighter who's a veteran of the Great War. Or the barbarian with anger issues. Or even the bard who's, well, young, dumb, and full of, well, you know. These are all classics for a reason. They're just plain fun. There's nothing wrong with playing a character that is common. Just be aware that you're playing into stereotypes. That said, it's also a lot of fun to sometimes subvert these tropes and create very interesting characters. A barbarian who has complete control of their emotions through meditation and philosophy and can choose exactly when to trigger their own anger responses for peak battle performance, that's a very interesting twist on a classic barbarian. Or a rogue like my chamomile, who is just a spotlight hog and in it for the fame. He just happens to be very spry and dexterous. That's another good example. But what about even stranger ones, like an old woman who prays fervently for her lost grandson to be returned to her, only to be granted the power to save him herself by her deity? That would make an amazing warlock, a cleric, or even a paladin. And it twists the tropes of each of those classes in different and unique ways. Anyway, I've talked for far too long already, so let me do a quick review and then I'll stop. First up, number 1, personality. Number 2, individual goals. Number 3, give your character room to grow. Number 4, give them a reason to stick with the party. And number 5, awareness and the optional subversion of tropes. Thanks for sticking with me so far. Have a wonderful day, and keep in mind that these are just my own thoughts about character creation, straight from the horse's mouth. If you have anything to add or dispute, or simply want to gush about your own characters, please do so in the comments. Not only would I love to hear it, but it would also help appease my own patron, the almighty YouTube algorithm. Bye!